Welcome to A Republican Professor. I am your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. Today is 12 June 2026 years after Jesus, and we're back on F. Bruce's Israel and the Nations, a history of Israel and the nations. Let's take a look at the title page again. The subtitle is From the Exodus to the Fall of the Second Temple. F. Bruce got his doctorate from the University of Aberdeen, which was one of the major medieval universities in the British Isles. And there's four. That's one of them. F. Bruce is my intellectual grandfather. He trained uh, Bruce Demarest, who trained me at Denver Seminary. And he's a towering figure. We've been interacting with his wonderful book here, originally made available by Erdman's in the 1960s. And we're going to do a fair use, make a transformative reading of this material. Last time we covered Omri, the house of Omri, where we covered the prophets Elijah and Elisha. And now we're getting more into the prophets. This chapter is chapter 6, the Syrian wars and the rise of the prophets. And the dates are 841 to 745 BC. Yeah. Now, you'll see that it's going backwards, right? 841 to 745. That's because we're going toward the birth of Christ, who is the center of history. And then we start adding dates after Jesus. So we are 2026 years after Jesus. Those years may be off by a couple of years, maybe four, maybe five, something like that, not more than six. It's hard to tell, but it's generally between 4 and 6 years, we're pretty sure was after the birth of Christ. Pretty sure we're within that ballpark there. So we are we're honored to interact with this material. Now, Dr. Frederick F. Bruce is Ryland's professor of biblical criticism and exegesis at the University of Manchester in England. Now, that was when he was alive. He's since passed on. And so we are benefiting from his wonderful work. Now, of course, this is material that is always relevant. It's been relevant for thousands of years, and it will be relevant today as well. When King Ahaziah of Judah died at Megiddo of the wound inflicted by one of Jehu's archers, his mother, Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab, decided that the moment was opportune to seize power for herself in Jerusalem. So starts our wonderful guest today, Dr. F. Bruce of the University of Manchester, in his chapter 6, Syrian Wars and the Rise of the Prophets, 841 to 745 BC. She was able to secure the support of the royal bodyguard and had all the royal family massacred. You thought Trump's tweets were bad. Only Ahaziah's 6-month-old son, Joash, escaped her notice. He and his nurse were smuggled out of her way, and the infant prince was brought up in the temple precincts. The worship of Melkart appears to have flourished in Jerusalem during Athaliah's reign of 6 years. Now remember, this is a woman, and she didn't even have a community college education with a gender studies degree, and she reigned for 6 years. So, I mean, they didn't even have the benefit of, marching around Haight-Ashbury without a bra on. They didn't even have that kind of power. and she reigned for 6 years. I mean, she didn't even have an AC repair and gun bluing and HVAC repair technician degree from Colorado Aerotech. I don't think they had gun bluing at Colorado Aerotech. My dad went there. Nothing at all against Aerotech because my dad went there. Is it still around, by the way? Let me know if you know in the comments. I'm curious. Um, Now, this suggests that she was a daughter of Jezebel. Yeah. Now, Jezebel did have a gender studies degree, and that actually explains everything. As soon as you get that fact, the whole Old Testament makes sense. But in the seventh year, there was a popular rising led by the priest Jehodiah, Jehod, Jehoiada, Jehoiada. We got to bring some of these names back, who succeeded in getting the royal bodyguard to transfer their allegiance from Athaliah to the young prince Joash. They guarded the temple while the boy Joash was brought forth and proclaimed king of Judah. Athaliah did not get wind of what was afoot until it was too late. When she came into the temple with a cry of treason on her lips, she was immediately hustled out and put to death as soon as she was outside the sacred precincts. The installation of Joash as king was marked by a tripartite covenant ceremony between Yahweh, the king, and the people. The dynasty of Jehu lasted for nearly 100 years. At the beginning of Jehu's reign, Shalmaneser III of Assyria paid a return visit to the west, and Jehu is recorded as one of the western rulers who paid him tribute. He is called Jehu, son of Omri, in the Assyrian account, ironically enough, when one recalls that he had so lately exterminated the dynasty of Omri, but the title simply marks him out as king of the land of Omri. Jehu probably welcomed the Assyrian protection against his Damascene neighbors to the northeast and thought it cheaply bought at the price of the tribute paid. But Shalmaneser returned to Assyria, and after 839, no Assyrian army appeared in the western lands for nearly 40 years. No protection came from that direction against the Syrians. I guess you wasted your money there. Jehu's precipitate departure, turning the page from page 53 to page 54 at the top, Ramoth Gilead to seize the throne. Okay, sorry. Jehu's precipitate departure from Ramoth Gilead to seize the throne for himself weakened the Israelite defenses there, and the bloodshed that accompanied his revolt weakened the state internally. The menace of Syrian encroachment kept on growing during the reign of Jehu, who reigned from 841 to 814 BC. Remember, we're going back toward the birth of Christ, and reached its climax under his son Jehoiaz, who reigned from 814 to 798 BC. Jehoahaz. Hazael of Damascus and his son and successor Ben-Hadad II pressed home every advantage until it looked as if Israel's independence as a nation would be lost altogether. So low was Israel brought that Jehoahaz could muster no more than 10,000 infantry with 50 horsemen and 10 chariots, an eloquent index of Israel's decline since the day when Ahab was able to send 2,000 chariots to the Confederate army that faced Shalmaneser at Karkar. You guys getting this? What stands out to you here? Conflict is normal. That doesn't mean it's good. That's one thing that stands out. There's other things that stand out. We'll point them out here. The Syrians invaded Israel from the north and east. They occupied all Transjordan and infiltrated down the western coastal plain as far south as Gath. Remember, that's where Goliath was from. This occupation of Gath was a threat to Jerusalem, and Joash had to buy them off with treasures of his temple. The priesthood and people appear to have been alienated from Joash in the consequence, and he was assassinated about 800 BC. Other enemies of Israel profited by their distress. The Ammonites, for example, encroached from the southeast upon Israel's territory east of Jordan, massacring the population to acquire more living space for themselves. When the fortunes of Israel were at their lowest ebb, Yahweh gave Israel a deliverer. Mind if we camp out there for a sec? When the fortunes of Israel were at their lowest ebb, Yahweh gave Israel a deliverer. Is it me? Maybe it's just me. I wonder, why does he wait until they're at their lowest ebb? Why does the Lord do that? Huh? Answer me. I think it's because he wants them to know there is no other help coming. Their reliance is on the Lord alone. That's it. All this other stuff, when you rely on it for a while and it works here, works there, seems to, it's not ultimately where your trust is. It's hard. It's hard to figure out how much you should trust in your own. I mean, you got to figure out what the next step is, right? We all like to plan for the future. We enjoy when our plans succeed, but I think that the teaching here is that if you do that and that's characteristic of your life, you will forget the Lord is your deliverer. And the scriptures bear this out. When you make plans, you should say, if the Lord wills. Remember James? Remember that? Feeding this into the wisdom literature is important. But time and again, wisdom is not what saves you. It's the Lord. Nothing else. This deliverer can be identified as the Assyrian king Adad-nirari the third. Adad-nirari. I'm sure I screwed that one up. Who in 803 BC led an expedition against Syria, in the course of which he raided Damascus and made it tributary. Syrian pressure on Israel relaxed. Jehoash, who succeeded Jehoaz as king of Israel, 798 to 782 BC, was able to beat the Assyrians off and to recover the Israelite cities which they had taken in his father's reign. Although the long drawn out tribulation of these years, all through the long drawn out tribulation of these years, Israel had one man whose morale and confidence in Yahweh never wavered. The prophet Elisha was a tower of strength to his people, and when at last he lay on his deathbed, King Jehoash came down to see him and wept over him. My father, he cried, Israel's chariots and horsemen, echoing the words spoken by Elisha himself when his master Elijah was taken from him. Elisha's last words presaged Israelites' victory over the Syrians, and Jehoash inflicted 3 defeats on them. Jehoash also took Jerusalem after receiving a foolish challenge from Ama, Amai, Amaziah, Amaziah, who knows, the successor of Joash as king of Judah. Amaziah had conquered Edom and thought himself strong enough to face Israel in battle, but he was beaten and made tributary, and a good part of Jerusalem's fortifications were dismantled. Amaziah was discredited and had to flee from Jerusalem, where the people made his son Uzziah king in his place, and he ruled from 791 to 740 BC. A few years later, Amaziah was assassinated at Lachish, where he was able to hold out for some time after leaving Jerusalem. We're on page 55 at the top. I hope you're enjoying this. About the same time as Uzziah was proclaimed king in Jerusalem, Jehoash of Israel died and was succeeded by his son Jeroboam II. And his dates of reign were 782 to 745 BC. Uzziah and Jeroboam II both enjoyed long and prosperous reigns. At the death of Adonijah III in 782 BC, the Assyrian tide receded for 40 years, but Damascus was now too weak to undertake renewed aggression against Israel and Judah. Uzziah recovered and fortified Elath on the Gulf of Aqaba. That's on the Red Sea. A major part of the book Lawrence of Arabia, and actually the film too, and reasserted Judean supremacy over the Philistine cities of the Mediterranean coastland. The agricultural economy of Judah received special attention. This prosperity of the kingdom may be judged from the variety of consumer goods enjoyed by the urban population. The character of his reign is mirrored in the early oracles of the prophet Isaiah. You've heard of him, right? A native of Jerusalem who was called to his prophetic ministry in the year that King Uzziah died. And that's quoting Isaiah 6:1. The catalog of female finery in Isaiah 3:18 and following suggests a high level of material prosperity and sophistication of polite society. But the underlying conditions of the body politic was not so healthy as the outward adornment might suggest. The wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few who had extended their property at the expense of their poorer brethren. Here's a quotation from Isaiah 5:8. Okay. Oh, sorry. Isaiah 3:13 through 15. Yahweh has taken his place to contend. He stands to judge his people. Yahweh enters into judgment with the elders and princes of his people. It is you who have devoured the vineyard. The spoil of the poor is in your houses. What do you mean by crushing my people, by grinding the face of the poor, says the Lord Yahweh of hosts. Here's a quotation from Isaiah 5:8. Woe to those who join house to house, who add field to field, until there is no more room, and you are made to dwell alone in the midst of the land. Back to F. Bruce. Nor could the poor secure justice when they sued for it. Their wealthy dispossessors were in a position to bribe venal judges. We're on page 56 at the top. We're quoting now from Isaiah 123. No, wait, sorry. Isaiah, 123. Your princes are rebels and companions of thieves. Everyone loves a bribe and runs after gifts. They do not defend the fatherless, and the widow's cause does not come to them. Now a quote from Isaiah 10:1. Woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees and the writers who keep writing oppression, to turn aside the needy from justice, and to rob the poor of my people of their right, that widows may be their spoil, and that they may make the fatherless their prey. Back to F. Bruce. Isaiah was a city dweller. The oppression of the poorer peasantry is even more vigorously described by his contemporary prophet, the countryman Micah, who lived in the southwestern part of the kingdom of Judah. So Micah was from the country, so he was a good old boy from the south, and he constantly had a dip in his mouth. And so a lot of times when he was prophesying, he would like be spitting into his cup, I'd be like, you know. And so here, you heads of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel. This is from Micah 3, 1 through 3. Is it not for you to know justice? You who hate the good and love the evil, who tear the skin off my people and their flesh off their bones, who eat the flesh of my people and lay their skin from off them, and break their bones in pieces and chop them up like meat in a kettle, like flesh in a cauldron. The people back then, they didn't like his tone. They also didn't like his Bass Pro Shops hat and the fact that he was dipping and saying this in a really southern accent. But nevertheless, they're the words of God. So you just had to deal with it. They don't like the tone. Well, the tone comes from God. So what about that? That kind of a thing. Back to F. Bruce. The small peasant proprietor tended to be more and more at the mercy of his wealthier neighbors. One bad harvest was a disaster. Two or three in succession might make life impossible. He could only mortgage his small holding to his wealthy neighbor, who would seize an opportunity to foreclose and add the small holding to his own estate, while the peasant and his family were compelled to work as his serfs. If this took place in Judah, it took place also and on a larger and more alarming scale in the northern realm, where the peasantry had been hit hardest by the Syrian invasions. Let's pause here and have a chaplain's corner. You might think this whole thing is a chaplain's corner. Well, yeah, maybe. This issue of justice is a big issue here. One might ask, these farmers that he just mentioned, one bad harvest, two or three in succession. You might ask, well, isn't the weather in control of the Lord? If they're trusting the Lord, then wouldn't he just protect their farm? Why this appeal to a wider social and political economic health that is protection of rights? Why rely on that now instead of just the Lord providing rain and health for crops for those who love God? And you can see that here in the scriptures, the issue of politics is not not a this worldly affair, something that is to be looked down upon and denigrated. This whole thing is about politics. It's all about politics. There's no reason why we shouldn't go back to page 11 and remind us of what he says this book is about. F. Bruce. F. Bruce, Ryland's professor of biblical criticism and exegesis at the University of Manchester in England, says on page 11 of his introduction, yet while these books have come down to us as Holy Scripture, they are historical source documents of first-rate worth. Okay, there's a historiographic point right there. Great. That's an archival point. Okay, yeah. This is what historians deal with as professional material. Good. The chapters, page 12 at the top, which follow, are not concerned with them as canonical writings, but as material for constructing a political narrative. Yet while these books have come down to us as Holy Scripture, page 11 at the bottom, they are historical source documents of first-rate worth. The chapters which follow, page 12 at the top, are not concerned with them as canonical writings, but as material for constructing a political narrative. This is all about politics, but it is also the Holy Scriptures. Let's continue. If this took place in Judah, it took place also and on a larger and more alarming scale in the northern realm, where the peasantry had been hit hardest by the Syrian invasions. Jeroboam II continued his father's work of winning back Israelite territory from Syria. He completed the reconquest of Transjordan as far south as the Dead Sea, while to the north he extended his power as far as the Hamathite frontier post of Lebwa, Lebva, Levva, and his reign, for all its political importance, is sketched but briefly in Second Kings. He is reprobated for his maintenance of the schismatic bull calf cults in the shrines at Dan and Bethel, but for the rest, his victories are presented as a merciful relief from the Damascene tribulation given to Israel by Yahweh, who saw that the affliction of Israel was very bitter, for there was none left, bond or free, and there was none to help Israel. But Yahweh had not proposed to blot out the name of Israel from under heaven, so he saved them by the hand of Jeroboam. That's quoting 2 Kings 14:26 and following. Page 57 at the top. Some of the details, however, can be filled in from the prophetic oracles of Amos and Hosea. They make some reference to the details of his military career, as the reconquest of the Transjordanian cities of Lo-Debar and Carnium, but they are most concerned with the religious and social conditions of the nation. There was a superficial prosperity, but it had been gained by depressing the status of the small independent peasants who had hitherto constituted the backbone of the nation. The respect for the ancient covenant laws, which had deterred even Ahab from taking Naboth's vineyard by force, had disappeared. Uh, the respect for the ancient covenant laws, which had deterred even Ahab from taking Naboth's vineyard by force, had disappeared. A chaplain's corner here. This is cultural degeneration. It's already really bad. Even then, God is giving his mercy in a political way for relief from the consequences of the sin. Yet there's further degeneration. The rich landowners had discovered means of appropriating vineyards like Naboth's without breaking the law. Here's a quotation from Amos 2, 6 through 8. Thus says Yahweh, for three transgressions of Israel, and for four I will not revoke the punishment, because they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of shoes, that they trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth, and turn aside the way of the afflicted. They lay themselves down beside every altar upon garments taken in pledge, and in the house of their God they drink the wine of those who have been fined. F. Bruce again. They and their wives lived in ease and luxury on the wealth which they had extorted from the poor, with no thought for the evils which such a course of life must bring in its train. Here's a quotation from Amos chapter 6, 4 through 7. Woe to those who lie upon beds of ivory, and stretch themselves upon their couches, and eat lambs from the flock, and calves from the midst of the stall, who sing idle songs to the sound of the harp, like David invent themselves instruments of music, and like David invent them for themselves instruments of music. So the musicians here are getting it. They're getting it. The musicians, the pop culture kind of a thing, who drink wine in bowls and anoint themselves with the finest oils, but are not grieved over the ruin of Joseph. Therefore they shall now be the first of those to go into exile, and the revelry of those who stretch themselves shall pass away. Page 58 at the top. Again, we're interacting with the wonderful work of Israel and the Nations by F. Bruce, made available by Erdman's in the 1960s. The subtitle is From the Exodus to the Fall of the Second Temple. We'd like to thank F. Bruce for writing it. We'd like to thank Erdman's Publishing for making it available. Go out and get your copy today. Get a physical copy. Hold it in your hands. Go to Erdman's. Throw some money their way. Get some stuff. Get physical books. Page 58 at the top. Yet these same people were punctilious in their religious observances. Never did such abundant sacrifices smoke to Yahweh from the altars at Dan and Bethel and other sanctuaries in Israel, and the note of praise rose regularly and loudly from tongue and harp. Was not this the worship in which Yahweh delighted? So they thought, but the voice of Yahweh through his prophet told a different story. Their unrighteousness and disregard of covenant obligations tainted their devotions and made them abominable in his sight. Little chaplain's corner here. Paul, and when he was in Athens in chapter 17, he said, Men of Athens, I perceive in everything you are very religious. People are extremely religious. And you'll see some of the most religious people are engaged in some of the most evil unrighteousness, and they have no idea. Well, they should, and maybe they do deep down, but whatever psychological forces are going on and spiritual forces, they're inured to their own unrighteousness, their own fraud, their lies, and self deception. And there's a group dynamic, there's a group think, because when you're around a bunch of people like that, it reinforces it in you. And these prophets are coming along and they're criticizing the music and the religious observance, the services, their church services, which function for them to puff them up and make them think of themselves as good when they're actually evil. They're fraudulent. They're lying. They're unrighteous. And the music and the groupthink reinforces their self-deception. It's possible and actual. We know it's possible because it's actual. This is in the scriptures. And the same thing happens today. Now, you got a prophet comes along with a very harsh tone and calls them to account. And they don't like that tone. Why? Because they feel really good about themselves because of this other dynamic that's going on. Nevertheless, the Lord is bringing the voice into their midst. And there are probably people that listen. There probably are. The Lord is not abandoning them to their own sin. This is a quotation from Amos 5:21 through 24. I hate, I despise your feasts. Can you imagine Amos saying this? Can you imagine Amos saying that? I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and cereal offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fatted beasts I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps I will not listen, but let justice flow down like waters, and righteousness like an ever flowing stream. Yeah, that's a pretty harsh tone, but that's characteristic of the prophet. He speaks for God. F. Bruce, they talked glibly about the day of Yahweh, the day when Yahweh would deal in judgment with his enemies. But they did not realize that Yahweh's judgment was to be executed in righteousness, and that iniquity would be punished in whomsoever it was found. I screwed that up. It was a question. But did they not realize that Yahweh's judgment was to be executed in righteousness, and that iniquity would be punished in whomsoever it was found? And if it were found in Israel, it would be punished more severely in them than in others. For other nations had not enjoyed the knowledge of Yahweh and his will as Israel had done. Yahweh had no favorites. If he brought up Israel from the land of Egypt, he also brought their neighbors, the Syrians and the Philistines, from their former habitations to settle them in their present territories. And if he had driven out the former inhabitants of Canaan before Israel because of their sin, he would, on the same principle, dispossess Israel too. A chaplain's corner here too. um, we're almost done with this chapter, but I just wanted to put the book down here and have a second with you about contemporary Israel. By contemporary, I mean 1900s. Okay. I highly recommend. I'm gonna recommend two Jewish writers to you. Okay. Because I'm not going to take any sides here. I'm I'm a I'm a scholar, and I want to equip you to know the truth and to understand the dynamics of what are happening here. And I know that that's a tall order and maybe it's laughable and not possible, but I'm going to try anyway. For anybody who's listening, I'm going to recommend two books by a man named Leon Uris. One is called Mila 18. Mila 18. Read that book first. Mila 18 by Leon Uris. Then after that, you can read a book if you want called Exodus by Leon Uris. Don't watch the movie, read the book. Read the book, read the novel. Mila 18, Exodus. So if I was teaching a course, this is what I would assign you. Then I want you to read a book called The Chosen by Chaim Potok, Chaim Potok. Chaim Potok has a PhD in philosophy. So, yeah, The Chosen. The Chosen takes place in the United States, and it's a story of a friendship between two Jewish boys who come from families with radically different understandings of what becomes the modern state of Israel in the 1940s. And it's a story of their friendship and their families. I'm going to just say one more thing about this book, The Chosen. Um, the book, in a way, is about the difficulty of biblical fidelity and biblical interpretation, um, and how to apply that in the contemporary world. And so, in that sense, any Christian can and should relate with what Chaim Potok presents there, because it's scriptural interpretation and wrestling with the text, wrestling with historical commentators, and so on and so forth to apply it to today. And so the thing I'm going to just leave you with here is that the Hasidic uh, branch, which some people call it Pharisaical, uh, the descendant of the Pharisees, fine, whatever, Orthodox, however you want to cash it out. The Hasidics were um, not for what you would call the modern state of Israel. They were not for what they would call Zionism, contemporary Zionism. They were against it. Why? Because it was secular. And in the scriptures, nowhere is there a praise for a secular Israel as having a unique relationship with the Lord. Now, on the other hand, there's the non-Hasidic Jewish family, and wrestling with the same thing, but trying to what they're on the ethnic side, meaning a broader definition of ethnic Judaism, Jewishness, and a nation state in the history, and trying to link it up with the history in the biblical tradition, but only in ethnic terms, not in religious terms. And so the ethnic identity of Israel as a safe haven for the kind of stuff that happened in Mila 18. And you're not going to understand that side unless you understand Mila 18. And you might say that's a secular approach, but compatible with compatible with some understandings of the religious approach. Now, that's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to get into the Hasidic versus the non-Hasidic. I'm not going to go down that road. Don't even try. Don't even try. I'm not going to try. I'm just going to let you know that there's debate even within Judaism about Zionism, and and I think you probably know where I fall on that debate because, well, when you read Mila 18, you'll know where I'm on. You'll know where I'm at. But I want you to know that there's a very serious discussion about it, and it's not one that you should take lightly because it also applies to the United States. And it applies to any nation, just like F.F. Bruce just said. He just said it. He just said it. Now, the external form of worship was valueless without those inward and practical virtues which were lacking in Israel. We're on page 58 at the bottom. Amos would have agreed completely with the words of Micah in Judah. And here's a quote from Micah 6:8. What does Yahweh require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? F.F. Bruce again. But that was not all. The external forms of popular worship themselves were corrupted by imitation of the old fertility cults of Canaan, with its blunting of their ethical perception. Ritual prostitution was practiced at the solemn festivals. You got idolatry. This is me. You got idolatry, you got sexual immorality, and you got injustice. All three of those categories of sin violate the Ten Commandments. Idolatry, sexual immorality, injustice. They all go together. And they are permanent categories of critique from Yahweh to the nations. Permanent. Page 59 at the top. A quotation from Amos 2:7. A man and his father go into the same maiden, so that my holy name is profaned. F.F. Bruce again. Further details of these practices are given by Hosea, whose own wife was seduced by them. But it was Hosea's forgiving love for his errant wife that brought home to him the persistence of Yahweh's love for his unfaithful people. He would bring them back to their old covenant loyalty, but first they must be broken of their addiction to Canaanite idolatry by being uprooted and carried away from their land, back to the wilderness to renew their allegiance to their God, who had first made himself known to them and won their love there. In situations of this kind, as T.H. Robinson has pointed out, one of two things is bound to happen, and either way involves ruin. Either the point will come where the downtrodden peasantry will revolt and overthrow the civilization erected on their oppression, or if they have lost sufficient spirit even to do this, then the nation has rotted from within and will fall, an easy prize into the hand of the first aggressive adventurer who comes that way. Here's a quotation from Hosea 1:4. Ill fares the land, to hastening ills a prey. Whoa, hold on a second. That's not from Hosea. Where wealth accumulates and men decay. No, that's not Hosea. Jeez. In the world. There's no footnote there, so I don't know where that's from. The hastening ills followed chiefly from the death of Jeroboam II, about 745 BC. His son Zechariah reigned only 6 months and was then assassinated at Iblim on the plain of Jezreel by Shalom ben Japheth, apparently one of his military officers. The dynasty of Jehu thus came to an end in the fourth generation. It ended as it had begun, in rebellion and assassination. Not long before, Hosea had been commanded to give his firstborn son the symbolic name of Jezreel. For yet a little while, said Yahweh, and I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. That quotation is from Hosea 1:4 and following. That's Hosea 1:4. Amos too had foretold that Yahweh would rise against the house of Jeroboam with sword, and it was in fact this prophecy that constituted the final provocation to the chief priest of Bethel and made him send Amos back to his own home in Judah. That's from Amos 7:9. But Shallum did not enjoy the kingdom long. In a month's time, he fell in turn before another military leader, Menhaem Ben Gadi, who assumed the royal dignity, subdued the cities which held out against him, and by a display of frightfulness made sure that there would be no rebellion against his rule. And we're done with that one. Chapter 7 is coming up, and chapter 7 is the decline and fall of the northern kingdom from 745 to 721 BC. We've been interacting with Israel and the Nations by F. Bruce. F. Bruce was Ryland's professor of biblical criticism and exegesis at the University of Manchester. And this was originally made available by Erdman's. Go out and get your copy today. We'd like to thank Erdman's for making this material available and for F. Bruce for writing it again. F. Bruce is my spiritual grandfather because he trained my mentor, Bruce Demarest. Bruce Demarest got his PhD at the University of Manchester and studied under F. Bruce. And I studied under Bruce Demarest in the late 1990s and early 2000s at Denver Seminary. Thanks for joining me on the Republican Professor podcast. I've been your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. It is Friday, 12 June, 2026 years after Jesus. God bless you guys. Take care.